I'm joined by Dr. Stephen Meyer, geophysicist, PhD, director of the Discovery Institute's Center for Science and Culture, and writer of the brand new documentary, The Story of Everything, which premieres this week in theaters nationwide. Let's have a quick look at the trailer.
Today, I'm going to tell you a story which may seem very strange.
Galileo, Kepler, Newton.
Each tried to explain events in the history of the universe.
Has the universe always been here, or is it finite?
Is there something else that would lay these questions to rest?
It reopens that question of ultimate meaning.
How in the world did this start?
The simulation theory?
The multiverse. You can't trust what's in front of your eyes.
Come on, that's ridiculous. That belongs in the movies.
We want to take our metaphysical hypotheses and see what they point to.
And I can remember him saying,
Here is evidence for what can only be described as a supernatural event.
he himself made a discovery that shook his personal philosophy.
The fact the universe sprang into being at a definite moment seems to me theological.
And it is science that has revealed this.
Dealing with a system of manifold, complex design.
Force compared with the weak nuclear force.
1 part in 10 to the 10,000. 1 part in 10 to the 20,000.
Turned out to be the tip of the iceberg.
We associate information with a rational intelligence behind it.
It had an uncanny resemblance to a digital bit stream, very much like an information carrier.
You can read the same segment forward to get one protein and backwards to get another.
It struck us with a tremendous impact.
Without guidance, we would get a life-unfriendly universe. Many organisms have beauty beyond anything that's relevant for their survival value.
The concept of life as a cosmic phenomenon should have many consequences. The question then was, what does one do about it?
Dr. Meyer, thank you so much for joining me. You know, most people have an inner curiosity about the story of everything, of how we got here. But for the better part of a century, many scientists have tried to explain it with a mindless, purposeless process over time. However, it seems that advances in science are actually moving toward intelligent design, not away from it. So what new discoveries have been made that indicate that you display in your film?
Yeah, that's a great question, Beau. Thanks for having me on. The film is actually the story of 3 great discoveries that are leading scientists to reconsider and even reaffirm belief in God because of, not in spite of, the scientific evidence. And the first story of discovery we tell is the story of how scientists determined that the universe, as best we can tell, had a definite beginning. Prior to the middle of the last century, many scientists assumed that the universe was eternal and self-existent, that it had always been here, and therefore didn't need an external creator. And starting in the 19-teens and 20s, and then right up to the present, there have been a series of discoveries showing that the universe had a beginning. And that suggests the need for an external cause or creator. And when philosophers and scientists think deeply about, well, what kind of a cause could explain the origin of the universe, the origin of matter, space, time, and energy, it's not a materialistic cause. It's matter that comes into existence at the beginning. So it must be something that transcends matter and energy, and it is outside of space and time, and yet is volitional, capable of initiating a change of state from everything to nothing. So that's the first big discovery. The universe had a beginning. The second big discovery is that from the very beginning, the universe has, as the physicists say, been finely tuned to allow for the possibility of life. Many physicists now talk about our living in a Goldilocks universe where the fundamental forces of physics, the masses of the elementary particles, the force that is pushing the universe outward, and many other fundamental parameters of physics fall within very narrow sweet spots or ranges outside of which life itself would be impossible, even basic chemistry would be impossible. And the collective improbability of all these different parameters falling in those sweet spots is infinitesimally small. It looks like the universe was a setup job. In fact, one of the physicists who discovered this, who was previously a scientific atheist, Sir Fred Hoyle, said that a common sense interpretation of the facts suggests that a super intellect has monkeyed with physics to make life possible. And the third discovery is is a whole series of discoveries really about the interior of the living cell. Over the last half century and all the way back to the 1950s, scientists have been discovering that inside living cells, there's a whole exquisite realm of digital technology, information that's stored in the DNA molecule, and additionally, little miniature machines that the DNA molecule, the production of which the DNA molecule is responsible for. And so inside the living cell, instead of being a simple glob of plasm, as scientists thought in the late 19th century, we've discovered that the cell is an exquisite realm of digital and nanotechnology. There's an information storage, transmission, and processing system inside every living cell of every living organism. And everything we know about the origin of information, think about software, is that it always comes from a mind, not an undirected material process. So many scientists are also now considering the design hypothesis or the intelligent design idea as a better explanation for the origin of life, as opposed to evolutionary ideas about how mindless chemicals organize themselves into the first cells. So the universe had a beginning. It's been fine-tuned since the beginning. And long after the beginning, life arises, and when it arises, it exhibits an exquisite realm of information and nanotechnology. And all these things are, I think, pointing to what I call the return of the God hypothesis.
Well, you know, in the film, Doctor, you mentioned several scientists who had theories that they themselves ended up disproving. Einstein, for instance, thought the universe was static. Sandage came around to a theistic viewpoint. Jastrow could not imagine a naturalistic cause for the universe. Dean Kenyon found problems in his own biochemical predestination theory. Many of these scientists had what you might even call a religious conversion. What does that say about scientific bias, or is it simply that their discoveries revealed a truth that they could not ignore?
Well, I think it's the latter, but there has been a bias as well. Since the late 19th century, a kind of rule of reasoning or rule of method became normative in the sciences. And the idea was that if you're going to be a scientist, you must limit yourself to strictly materialistic explanations for everything. Well, that science sounds kind of reasonable because we study the material or the natural world. But it's possible that features of the natural world were the product of a creative intelligence as well as or undirected materialistic processes. And so we've been arguing that scientists need to be, when they're investigating origins, they need to be open to both possibilities. And if you rule one possibility out of court from the outset, the idea that creative intelligence played a role in developing, for example, the digital code in DNA, you might be terminally barking up the wrong tree, always looking for the wrong kind of answer when the right kind of answer is staring you in the face. If you go to the museum in London, the British Museum, and you encounter the Rosetta Stone, you'll see inscriptions carved in rock. If you apply that rule of we must explain everything materialistically, you'll miss the actual explanation. Those inscriptions didn't come about through wind and erosion. They came about through the activity of an intelligent scribe. They ultimately resulted in the idea of from a mind. So there are certain features of our experience that always arise from intelligent agents. And when we find those in the living world or in the universe itself, it's reasonable to infer that the universe and life also had an intelligent source. And that's one of the key arguments of the film. And that's one of the reasons that the scientists that you mentioned have either changed their minds and become theists, or have changed their minds and become a lot more diffident about their previous theories.
Yeah, I found that fascinating. And you know, even many astronauts, like let's take Reed Wiseman from Artemis II, for example, have a theistic epiphany when they look back at our pale blue dot in all of its complex majesty. Why do you think, Dr. Meyer, that people here on Earth can't or don't look at the complex beauty around us in our own visible world and have a similar epiphany?
Well, I think sometimes it takes getting out into space to see just how special our planet is. And that's been a consistent experience of astronauts going back to Apollo 8 in the 1960s. 1968, the astronauts read the Genesis creation account from space. They were just so moved by what they had seen. The current head of NASA, Jared Isaacman, has said that his time in space convinced him of, quote, the heavens declare the glory of God. So there is something about having that God's eye view of Earth that makes you realize our planet is very special. The science supports that. There are numerous fine-tuning parameters that have to be just right to establish a life-friendly planet in a life-friendly solar system in just the right place in a life-friendly galaxy. The collective probability of that is extremely small, and it suggests that there was a design behind it all. But I think people generally, since the late 19th century, have assumed that science properly understood supports a materialistic or atheistic worldview. And the discoveries that we're talking about in the film show that that's not right. In fact, the assumption has been that science supports this materialistic worldview, and we're showing that the most important contemporary discoveries about the origin of the universe, the structure of the universe, and the origin and nature of life all better support the idea of theistic design, that there was a transcendent intelligence that is also active in the creation, not a deistic God, not a space alien, but an intelligence that has the attributes that traditional theists have long ascribed to God: transcendence, intelligence, volition, and being active in the creation.
Well, Dr. Meyer, I do want to make this current too. I was in a film recently that was released recently, in which I portray a real-life atheistic podcaster and teacher of evolution who debates an unassuming Christian grandpa. And I want to play a quick clip of that.
Sure, let's have a look.
Macroevolution is the goo to you via the zoo theory that all life started out as one-celled organisms and progressed through millions of years through gradual, non-directed mutations to the DNA, which proved to be advantageous to survival.
Really? Well, no wonder you'd have a problem with that. I would have a problem with evolution based on that definition. Evolution is so much more complex than just mutation selection. First of all, microevolution demonstrates the process that leads to macroevolution. And there's lots of other changes that are involved than just mutation selection. Are you familiar with the term epigenetics?
No.
Okay, how about alleles?
No.
Okay, I thought so. Well, without any changes to the DNA sequencing, epigenetic expression changes lead to new functionality in the phenotype containing that DNA. And the natural stressors also lead to such alterations. Without such knowledge, Douglas, you're not equipped to just go poking holes in any scientific theory. And there's lots of Christians out there who accept both God and evolution. The two don't have to be mutually exclusive. Though, I personally find the idea of God and heaven to be repulsive.
Well, Richard Dawkins did say one thing that I agree with. He said that the Bible, the God of the Bible, and macroevolution are not compatible. They can't coexist.
So my character is based upon biologist Forrest Valkai, aka the renegade science teacher on YouTube, who spends lots of his time, doctor, roasting creationist films. Does the story of everything and the discoveries inside it provide ample and empirical counters to skeptics like Valkai?
Well, we don't. The film only has a portion of a third act that's addressing Darwinian evolution. It addresses much more directly the question of chemical evolution, the idea that undirected chemical reactions have produced the first cell. We do address the question of whether or not Darwinian evolution can explain the origin of the molecular machinery inside life. But my second book, Darwin's Doubt, takes on all those different counter arguments that the rather smug, I suppose he was played a teacher, was making. First of all, he referred to epigenetics. That's a buzzword that can mean lots of different things, but it essentially refers to the fact that in addition to the information that's in DNA, there is information encoded in other ways, in other structures within living systems. And that actually poses a formidable problem to the neo-Darwinian explanation of the origin of life. In particular, it shows that you could mutate DNA indefinitely, and even if you overcame the long odds of developing a new protein or protein fold, which is itself highly dubitable, you would never build the higher level structures that are necessary to build body plans. And so the presence of information at higher levels is actually a challenge to that. Yep.
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Dr. Meyer.
So epigenetic or ontogenetic information is actually a challenge to that. Now, he also refers to other evolutionary processes such as natural genetic engineering, the idea that organisms can respond to environmental cues, that mutations are not always random. That's absolutely true, and it's something that's been established by the University of Chicago cell biologist James Shapiro. But the rub there is that Shapiro shows that organisms have a kind of pre-programmed adaptive capacity, and that many mutations are under a kind of algorithmic control, so that when there's an environmental change, it will trigger an adaptive response with certain genes being turned on and others being turned off. That's great biology, and it is certainly non-neo-Darwinian, but natural genetic engineering as a theory never explains where the pre-programming came from. And that's where we think there's a locus of design, that there's evidence of intelligent design in the very process that he and your character are playing. So there's very good answers to all of the challenges that your character was offering to what was, I'm sure, being portrayed as this rather simplistic Christian raising questions about evolutionary theory. Many evolutionary biologists are now calling for a new theory of evolution. And I attended a conference in 2016 at the Royal Society in London, where many of those biologists had convened. At the end of the conference, and they enumerated numerous problems with the textbook version of evolutionary theory that we all learn, but they were also trying to compensate for what they perceived as a lack of creative power associated with the mutation natural selection mechanism. These other mechanisms that your character was citing themselves, however, lack creative power. And this is something that's been demonstrated in a lot of other critiques of these newer theories of evolution, including 2 chapters in my own book, Darwin's Doubt, where I dealt with 7 or 8 of these new non-neo-Darwinian theories of evolution. The bottom line there is that they all either presuppose unexplained sources of genetic and other types of biological information, or they posit processes that clearly do not generate information and therefore have no basis for explaining where a new biological form comes from. So as smug as your character was, there's very good answers to the objections that he was raising.
Yeah, and it just seems like that you get this simplistic Christian viewpoint versus this very detailed, Darwinian account, and the two are always kind of diametrically opposed. It is interesting in the film how things turn out, and I hope people will watch it. But you mentioned about there being a fine-tuning to the universe, but also one step further, a fine-tuning for discovery. And I was wondering if you would explain that, meaning it looked to me like the creator, if it's intelligent design, is almost laying out the framework for us to make discoveries about how things began.
Well, this is the argument of a wonderful book called Privileged Planet that was written by astronomer Guillermo Gonzalez and philosopher Jay Richards. And they argued that not only are there numerous fine-tuning parameters at the cosmological level that are necessary to establish stable galaxies and planetary systems, but beyond that, there are numerous fine-tuning parameters that are necessary to make a stable or a life-friendly planet such as ours. And again, the collective probability of all of those parameters being just right is infinitesimally small. You have to have the right axial tilt of the planet. The planet has to be the right distance from the right sized host star. It has to have the right overall gravitational mass to hold just the right kind of gases, atmospheric gases, so that you have the right kind of atmosphere. You need the right kind of a magnetic field to protect the planet from harmful solar radiation, and on and on and on it goes. It turns out, though, and this was the curious thing that they argued in their book or noticed in the book, that the same ensemble of parameters that make life for a life-friendly planet also have made Earth a planet that is uniquely situated to make fundamental discoveries about the universe and basic physics. And so they argue that there's this sort of weird conversion. The two things from a physical standpoint have nothing to do with each other, and yet there's this convergence of parameters that ensure that both outcomes are simultaneously instantiated or developed. And so they argue that this is clear evidence of design, and their argument is that not only was the Earth designed to be habitable, it was designed to be a fit platform for scientific discovery. In other words, the designer wants his creation to be known and understood by the people that he's placed on this unique planet, to enjoy the planet and also to enjoy what he's made.
Yeah, after just seeing the Dead Sea Scrolls exhibit at the Museum of the Bible, I kind of had a similar feel to that. And now seeing your film, I think it just illuminates so much more. Well, Dr. Meyer, where can people go to get tickets for the film? I want to make sure people understand how they can get tickets, because it's in a number of theaters this week, and also more information about you and your pursuit and continued illumination of all these wonderful scientific facts.
Well, thanks for asking. The film is in over 500, close to 600 theaters across the country. It opens tonight, Thursday night, April 30th. It will air for at least 6 nights, but may extend depending on box office response and ticket sales. So far, very good numbers, so we're hopeful of that. And that people can get tickets at the website, thestoryofelything.film. thestoryofelything.film. Also, if there are students or student groups that want to go, there's been an offer for deeply discounted and even free tickets for students, and that's available through our website at discovery.org. So thestoryofelything.film or discovery.org are good websites to follow up on this conversation.
Dr. Meyer, I think this film is honestly worthy of critical acclaim and awards acclaim. I think about the Oscars and Best Documentary and An Inconvenient Truth, of course. Given its subject matter, do you think it will achieve any acclaim? And if not, do you care?
Well, I don't know. That we've got a series of very nice reviews on Rotten Tomatoes by accredited reviewers there. We also may be the only film in history that's had a positive review in the conservative Wall Street Journal and in the left-leaning Hollywood Progressive. So we're getting good responses from people across the political spectrum as well, which is kind of fun.
That is.
The film's bring people together around an investigation of the deepest questions.
And it should, because scientific theory should always be in pursuit of the truth and not what is predisposed or presumed. So, Dr. Meyer, thank you so much, and everyone, you must go out and see The Story of Everything. Thank you, Doctor.